One whispered word, spoken in a language no one thought she knew, was all it took to detonate a $900 million deal in the hushed, mahogany-paneled library of Chicago's most exclusive private club. They saw the uniform, the faded blue of a contract cleaner, and saw nothing at all. She was a ghost in the machine of the city's elite, a woman paid to erase herself, to make fingerprints and dust motes vanish before dawn. But when the impeccably dressed man with the predatory smile spoke in the flowing, guttural Arabic of the Gulf, he made a catastrophic error. He assumed invisibility meant ignorance. He didn't realize the woman emptying the wastepaper basket was the only person in that room who could hear the sound of the guillotine being readied. This is the story of how Clara Evans, a night shift cleaner on the brink of losing everything, saved a legacy from a pack of wolves, armed with nothing but a spray bottle, a dust rag, and a truth spoken in a foreign tongue. The Olympian Club was not a place you found. It was a place you were admitted to, a fortress of old money and new power nestled in a landmark grey stone building on Astor Street. It had no sign, only a single, polished brass plaque bearing the image of a discus thrower. Its members, titans of industry and finance, didn't come for the Michelin-starred food or the 100-year-old scotch. They came for the silence. They came for the privacy to carve up the world without leaving a trace. Clara adjusted the thin strap of her respirator mask, the acrid scent of industrial-grade wood polish clinging to her senses. The mask was supposed to protect her lungs, but it felt more like a muzzle, a constant reminder of her place in this gilded ecosystem. 5 years ago, she had been poring over engineering textbooks at the University of Illinois, dreaming of designing bridges that would span generations. Now she was polishing the very tables where men brokered deals that could crumble entire towns, all for the sum of $19 an hour before taxes. Library's the last stop, Clara. Make it quick. Mr. Sterling has a late meeting. The voice belonged to Marcus, the club's night manager, a man whose spine seemed to have been replaced by a ramrod. He didn't look at her, only at his clipboard. And for God's sake, be discreet. He's closing the deal of his life. Yes, Marcus, Clara murmured, her voice muffled by the mask. She pushed her cart, its wheels squeaking a protest, across the Persian rug. The library was her favorite and least favorite room. It smelled of leather, history, and power. Thousands of books, their spines uncracked, stood as silent witnesses. Tonight, the air was thick with a different kind of tension. At the massive oak table in the center of the room sat Arthur Sterling. Clara knew the name, of course. Sterling Steel was as much a part of Chicago as the bitter winter wind. It was a legacy company, forged by his great-grandfather, a company that had built the skeletons of skyscrapers and the chassis of American cars for a century. But the papers were full of its slow decline, the struggle against cheaper foreign imports, and a changing world. Arthur Sterling, maybe 45, looked every bit the part of a man carrying the weight of that history. He had his father's strong jawline, but his eyes, shadowed with exhaustion, were his own. He fiddled with a silver pen, his knuckles white. He was a man holding onto a cliff edge with his fingernails. He was waiting. He checked his watch, a simple, elegant timepiece that spoke of inherited class rather than new wealth, every 30 seconds. He was sweating, a faint sheen on his brow despite the room's cool, conditioned air. Clara began her silent routine, starting in the far corner, dusting the shelves, her movements practiced and unobtrusive. Be a shadow. That was the first rule of the job. The rich didn't like to be reminded that their perfection required maintenance. At precisely 10:15 p.m., The heavy library doors swung open. The atmosphere didn't just shift, it curdled. 2 men entered, led by Marcus, who was now bowing so low he was practically folding in half. The man in the lead was Julian Croft. Clara recognized him from the business channels she sometimes watched on the small TV in her mother's room. Croft was a corporate mortician. He didn't save companies. He bought them, stripped them for parts, and sold the bones for a profit, leaving a trail of shuttered factories and hollowed-out pension funds. He was handsome in the way a shark is handsome, all teeth and cold, intelligent eyes. His suit was so perfectly tailored, it seemed to have been stitched directly onto his skin. Walking a half step behind him was a man Clara didn't recognize. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with a deeply lined, sun-beaten face and a meticulously trimmed white beard. He wore a traditional thobe and gutra, the crisp white fabric, a stark contrast to Croft's funereal grey suit. He carried himself with an air of immense, unshakable gravity. "Gentlemen, thank you for coming," Marcus purred, gesturing them toward the table. Arthur Sterling shot to his feet, nearly upsetting his water glass. "Julian, thank you for making this happen." Julian Croft offered a smile that was all geometry and no warmth. "Arthur, good to see you. You're looking determined." It was a calculated insult, and they both knew it. Croft gestured to the older man. "May I present Sheikh Khalid Al-Fahad? He represents the sovereign wealth fund we discussed." Sterling extended a hand. "Sheikh Al-Fahad, it is a profound honor. Sterling Steel welcomes you." The sheikh stared at Sterling's outstretched hand for a long, deliberate moment before giving it a brief, limp shake. He said nothing, his dark eyes scanning the room, dismissive and appraising, like a man inspecting livestock. "The sheikh speaks very little English," Croft interjected smoothly, taking a seat. "I will be translating to ensure absolute precision. The fund values clarity above all else." "Of course," Sterling said, sitting back down. He pushed a thick, leather-bound portfolio across the table. "I have the finalized asset reports and the 5-year projections for the modernization plan. With this capital infusion, we can automate the primary smelting line and secure the pension fund for the next 30 years. The fundamentals are strong, Julian. You know they are." Clara, now working her way along the wall behind Sterling, felt a knot of unease tighten in her stomach. Something was wrong. She hadn't grown up in a diplomatic circle, but she had spent the first 18 years of her life in and around Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, where her father had been a senior engineer for Aramco. She had played with the children of foremen and executives, had learned the rhythms of the language in the souks and the company compounds. She knew the subtle dance of respect and power in that culture. Sheikh Al-Fahad didn't carry himself like a partner. He carried himself like a conqueror. And Julian Croft looked like the man who had sold him the key to the city gates. "Clara," Marcus hissed, appearing at her elbow. "They want coffee. The Jamaican Blue Mountain. Use the silver service. And don't you dare spill a drop." Clara nodded and slipped out of the room. As she prepared the coffee service, her hands moved on autopilot, but her mind was back in the library. She thought of her father, a brilliant engineer who had given 40 years of his life to a company, only to be laid off with a diminished pension 2 years before he passed away. He had trusted the men in suits. He had believed in handshakes and honor. When she returned, she entered the invisible bubble of the negotiation. The men at the table assumed the staff were deaf and dumb, part of the furniture. Croft was leaning forward, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Arthur, the fund is prepared to commit the full $900 million. But there's a sticking point. The board structure. They are insisting on a 70% controlling stake." 70? Sterling's voice was a raw nerve. "Julian, we agreed on 49. 70 means it's not my company anymore. It's not Sterling Steel. It's just a name on a building they own." 70 means the gates don't close next month, Croft said, his tone shifting to one of deep, feigned sympathy. 70 means your 3,000 employees still have jobs. The Sheikh is taking an enormous risk, Arthur. The brand is tarnished. The infrastructure is aging. He's not buying a company. He's performing a rescue. Sterling ran a hand through his hair, his shoulders slumping. He looked defeated. Sheikh Al-Fahad then turned to Croft and spoke for the first time. His voice was a low rumble, like stones grinding together. He spoke in a crisp, Najdi Arabic. أخبره أن يتوقف عن الأنين مثل الأرملة. هل يريد المال أم لا? Clara froze. The silver coffee pot in her hand felt suddenly heavy as lead. She understood every single word. Tell him to stop whining like a widow. Does he want the money or not? Her heart began to pound a frantic, muffled rhythm against her ribs. She forced her hands to remain steady as she poured the dark, steaming liquid into the fine china cups. Croft nodded gravely at the Sheikh, then turned back to Sterling, his face a mask of thoughtful concern. The Sheikh is asking if you are feeling pressured. He wants to assure you that this is a partnership of equals, and that he respects the legacy your family has built. The lie was so audacious, so complete, it took Clara's breath away. It wasn't a mistranslation. It was a fabrication woven from thin air. She finished pouring the coffee, her movements stiff, robotic. She retreated to the far side of the room, ostensibly to clean the brass fixtures on a bookshelf, but her ears were straining, her entire being focused on the table. She watched them. Her mind raced. Marcus's warning. Her job. Her mother's mortgage was 2 months overdue. The foreclosure notice was sitting on the kitchen table at home, a folded piece of paper that felt as heavy as a tombstone. Her mother's health was failing, a cascade of ailments that the basic insurance she could afford barely touched. If Clara lost this job, they would lose the house her father had bought, the only home she had ever known. Stay invisible, a voice in her head screamed. It's not your fight. Just dust the shelves. But then she looked at Arthur Sterling. He was staring at the contract Croft had slid across the table, his face ashen. He was about to sign away his great-grandfather's legacy, the livelihoods of 3,000 families, all based on a lie. She saw her own father in his eyes, a good man being led to the slaughter by smiling men in expensive suits. She took a deep, shuddering breath. She picked up her bottle of wood polish and a clean cloth. The far side of the massive oak table could use a touch-up. The tension at the table was a physical presence, a suffocating weight in the air. The pot of Jamaican Blue Mountain coffee sat mostly untouched, its aroma lost in the smell of old paper and new betrayal. Arthur Sterling hadn't taken a sip. He was staring at the signature line on the 100-page contract, the silver pen lying next to it like a loaded weapon. The structure is ironclad, Arthur, Julian Croft was saying, his voice as smooth as the aged whiskey in his glass. We establish a new holding corporation in Delaware to absorb the assets. You remain as CEO, a figurehead really, but with the title and salary. We handle the board, the strategy, the unpleasant but necessary restructuring. Think of it as a golden off-ramp. Sterling looked up, his eyes pleading. The pension clause, Julian. It says the fund will be re-evaluated and restructured for long-term solvency. What does that mean? It means it will be solvent, Croft said with a dismissive wave. It's boilerplate language. It means you can dissolve it, Sterling countered, his voice gaining a desperate edge. My father gave his word to those men. Some of them have been working at the mill for 40 years. Their fathers worked there. That pension is a sacred trust." Croft let out a sigh of theatrical patience. He turned to Sheikh Al-Fahad and spoke, not in Arabic, but in English, a performative gesture for Sterling's benefit. "Mr. Sterling has some concerns about the pension fund's integrity." The sheikh narrowed his eyes. He leaned forward, tapping a thick finger on the table for emphasis. He spoke again, his Arabic sharp and contemptuous. "ديون الموتى لا تهم. سنقوم بتصفية الصندوق ونعطيهم 10 سنتات على الدولار. استخدم الأموال لتجريد الأصول بشكل أسرع." Clara was standing directly behind Sterling's chair, pretending to wipe down the spines of a set of leather-bound encyclopedias. The words struck her with the force of a physical blow. "The debts of the dead do not matter. We will liquidate the fund and give them 10 cents on the dollar. Use the money to strip the assets faster." Her grip on the dust cloth tightened until her knuckles were white. This wasn't just a hostile takeover. It was a grave robbery. Croft turned back to Sterling, his face arranged into an expression of deep, paternal reassurance. "The sheikh gives you his personal word of honor. He says a promise to a worker is as sacred as a promise to a king. The fund will not only be protected, it will be enhanced. He sees it as the bedrock of the company's future." "His word?" Sterling asked, searching the sheikh's stony face for some sign of confirmation. Does he understand what that mill means to the community?" The sheikh looked at Croft, waiting for the translation. Croft turned and relayed a question in Arabic. "يسأل عن رأيك في اللوحة الموجودة على الحائط." He asks what you think of the painting on the wall. Al-Fahad glanced at a somber oil painting of a 19th-century industrialist. He sneered and replied in Arabic, "اللوحة قبيحة والرجل أضعف مما كنت أعتقد. هذه الصفقة ستكون سهلة." "The painting is ugly, and the man is weaker than I thought. This deal will be easy." Croft faced Sterling, his smile unwavering. He says he understands completely. He admires the sense of community and history. It's what drew him to the investment in the first place. It was a symphony of deceit. Croft wasn't just translating. He was composing an entirely separate reality, building a gilded cage of lies around Sterling, making him feel understood and supported, even as the executioner sharpened his axe. Sterling finally picked up the pen. "All right," he breathed, the fight seeming to drain out of him. "All right, Julian. I don't see another way. If I don't sign, we're in receivership by the end of the quarter." "A wise decision," Croft purred. Initial on pages 12, 45, and 82. Full signature on the last page. Clara's heart hammered against her breastbone. It was a frantic drumbeat of panic and rage. Do something. Do something now. She looked toward the door. Marcus was gone, likely back in his office. She was alone with them. A ghost. She stepped forward, her worn, rubber-soled shoes making no sound on the thick rug. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice quiet but clear. The 3 men looked up, startled. Her very existence was a breach of protocol. "I apologize for the interruption," she said, directing her words to Sterling, but keeping her eyes downcast, the very picture of a deferential servant. "But I noticed a small water ring on the table from the condensation. If I could just wipe it before it damages the finish." Croft scowled. "We are in the middle of something. Get out." "It will only take a second, sir," Clara insisted, her voice trembling slightly, playing the part of a terrified employee who was simply trying to do her job. She moved to the edge of the table, right where the massive contract lay. As she leaned over with her cloth, she moved the heavy silver water pitcher slightly. Accidentally, she let a few cold drops of condensation from the pitcher fall directly onto the back of Arthur Sterling's hand. the hand holding the pen. The shock of the cold water was a physical jolt. Sterling flinched, dropping the pen on the contract, where it left a small blue smear. "Oh, I am so sorry, sir," Clara gasped, pulling back. "So clumsy of me." "Incompetent fool," Croft snarled. "Marcus will hear of this." But Clara didn't move away. She held her position, her head bowed in apology, and in that brief, tense moment, she caught Sterling's eye. He was wiping his hand with a napkin, his expression a mixture of annoyance and confusion. He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time. She held his gaze for a single, charged second, and mouthed 2 words, forming them with deliberate, silent precision. "He's lying." Sterling's frown deepened. He glanced at Croft, then at the sheikh, and then back at the cleaning woman. A flicker of something, doubt, curiosity, crossed his face. "What is the hold-up, Arthur?" Croft demanded, his patience wearing thin. "The sheikh has a flight to Geneva in 3 hours." Sterling slowly picked up the pen again. He was an engineer by training, a man who believed in data and tangible evidence. But he had felt it all night, the dissonance between Al-Fahad's hard, dismissive tone and the honeyed words Croft fed him. The cleaning woman's silent warning was an anomalous data point, but one that resonated with his own gut feeling. He decided to run a diagnostic. "Julian," Sterling said, his voice measured, "before I sign, ask the sheikh one more thing for me. Ask him what his fund's position is on the T34 chromium alloy we developed. It's our most valuable patent, but it requires specialized refining that can't be outsourced. It's key to our military contracts." Croft rolled his eyes. "Arthur, he's an investor, not a metallurgist. He has people for that." "Please," Sterling insisted. "It's important to me that he understands what he's buying." With an exasperated sigh, Croft turned to Al-Fahad and spoke in Arabic. Clara's blood ran cold. He hadn't asked the question. What he'd said was, "الرجل يماطل. إنه يسأل عن تفاصيل فنية غبية. هل يجب أن أقول له أن يصمت ويوقع?" The man is stalling. He's asking about stupid technical details. Should I just tell him to shut up and sign? The sheikh, annoyed, waved a dismissive hand. "قل له أي شيء. قل له إنها لامعة جدا. فقط اجعله ينهي الأمر." Tell him anything. Tell him it's very shiny. Just get it done. Croft turned back to Sterling, his expression radiating warmth and confidence. The sheikh says he is very familiar with the T34 alloy. He considers it the crown jewel of the company. He says his team was particularly impressed with its tensile strength and its applications in the aerospace sector. It's one of the primary reasons they pursued this deal. Sterling stared at Croft. Then his gaze drifted past him, to the woman standing silently by the bookshelf. Clara gave a single, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "No." A chill snaked down Arthur Sterling's spine. He placed the cap back on his pen with a decisive click. "Is there a problem?" Croft asked, the smile finally beginning to fray at the edges. "I need a moment to think," Sterling said, standing up. His chair scraped against the floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room. "I'm going to get some air." "Arthur, sit down. We are seconds away from closing." "I said," Sterling repeated, his voice now laced with steel, "I need a moment." He walked briskly toward the doors. As he passed Clara, he didn't stop, didn't even turn his head, but he spoke in a low, urgent whisper. "The west corridor. 1 minute." Clara waited, her heart a wild bird beating against her ribs. She counted to 60, her eyes fixed on Croft, who was now trying to placate the furious-looking sheikh. Then she slipped out of the library, her cleaning cart left behind like a shed skin. The west corridor was deserted, lined with portraits of stern-faced men who had once run the city. Arthur Sterling was pacing, his hands clenched into fists. He spun around as she approached, grabbing her by the arm. His grip was surprisingly strong. "What did you mean? He's lying." "How do you know?" he demanded, his voice a ragged hiss. "I speak Arabic," Clara said, her own voice shaking but firm. "I grew up in Saudi Arabia. My father was an engineer." Sterling stared at her, his mind visibly recalibrating his entire perception of her. What are they really saying? "Everything Mr. Croft is telling you is a lie," Clara said, the words tumbling out. "The Sheikh isn't respecting your legacy. He called you weak. He said you were whining like a widow. He isn't protecting the pensions. He said to liquidate the fund and give the workers 10 cents on the dollar. He wants to use the money to strip the company for parts." Sterling's face went slack, the color draining from it. "My God, the pensions." "And when you asked about the alloy," she continued, "Croft didn't even ask him. He told the Sheikh you were stalling and asked if he should tell you to shut up. The Sheikh told him to say anything, to just get it done. They are playing you, Mr. Sterling. This isn't a rescue. It's an execution." Sterling leaned heavily against the wall, sliding down it slightly, as if his legs could no longer support him. "It's a raid, a bust-out, all of it." He looked at the woman in the faded blue uniform, at her tired eyes, now blazing with a fierce intelligence. He realized his entire future, the legacy of his family, was resting in the hands of a complete stranger. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "You'll be fired." "I know," Clara said, a lump forming in her throat. "But my father, he was a company man. He believed in loyalty. He was destroyed by men just like them. I won't stand by and watch it happen to someone else." "Who was your father?" "It doesn't matter right now," Clara said, her focus sharpening. "What matters is what you do next. You can't go back in there and call them out. It's your word against a billionaire sheikh and a man like Croft. They'll say you're backing out of a deal. They'll say I'm a disgruntled employee looking for a payout. They will ruin you both." "Then what do I do?" Sterling asked, looking utterly lost. "They have me cornered." "No," Clara said, her eyes narrowing with a sudden, brilliant spark of an idea. "You don't corner them. You build a bigger cage. You have your phone, don't you?" "Yes, of course." "Can it record audio?" "Yes." "Good," Clara said, stepping closer. "Go back in there. Apologize for your hesitation. Tell them you're ready to sign. Place your phone on the table, face down. Then ask one final question. A very specific question. I'll tell you what it is. And while you're asking it," a grim smile touched her lips, "I'm going to make a phone call." Arthur Sterling walked back into the library. He felt as though he had aged a decade in the last 10 minutes. The desperation was gone, replaced by a cold, crystalline fury. He was no longer a victim walking to his own execution. He was a hunter setting a trap. He slid back into his chair. Julian Croft was examining his perfectly manicured nails, a picture of bored impatience. Sheikh Al-Fahad was scrolling through something on a gold-plated smartphone. "My apologies, gentlemen," Sterling said, his voice smooth and controlled. A moment of sentimentality. "It's a big step." He casually took his phone from his pocket and placed it on the table, face down, next to the contract. The recording app was already active. "Understandable," Croft said, his predatory smile returning. "Legacy can be a heavy burden. Shall we conclude?" "Almost," Sterling said, picking up the pen once more. He looked directly at Sheikh Al-Fahad, then turned to Croft. "I have one final question. It's about my people, not just the mill workers, but my executive team. Specifically, my Vice President of Logistics, David Chen. He's been with us for 30 years. He built our entire supply chain from scratch. I need to know the Sheikh's plans for him. I need to know if his position is secure. It was the question Clara had given him. It was specific, personal, and seemingly emotional, the perfect bait. Croft nodded, indulging him. Of course. He turned to the Sheikh and spoke in Arabic. His tone was dismissive, almost bored. الرجل العاطفي يسأل الآن عن أحد مديري. رجل صيني. هل يجب أن نطرده غدا أم الأسبوع المقبل? Clara, standing just outside the library door, her ear pressed to the crack, felt a surge of adrenaline. The translation was a masterpiece of cold-blooded betrayal. The emotional man is now asking about one of his managers, a Chinese man. Should we fire him tomorrow or next week? She held her breath, waiting for the Sheikh's reply. Al-Fahad scoffed, not even looking up from his phone. He replied with a single, guttural phrase. غدا. لا أريد أي ولاء قديم في إدارتي. Tomorrow. I want no old loyalties in my administration. Clara pulled her own cheap smartphone from her pocket. She had one person in her contacts list from her father's old life, a man who had been his closest friend, now a mid-level attaché at the Saudi Arabian consulate in Chicago. A man who owed her father a debt of honor. Her fingers flew across the screen, typing a text message. Uncle Tariq, I need your help. A man named Sheikh Khalid Al-Fahad is at the Olympian Club using a sovereign fund's name to defraud an American company. He is a predator, bringing dishonor. Please verify his credentials immediately. Your niece, Clara. She hit send. Inside the library, Croft turned back to Sterling, his face a perfect portrait of sincerity. He placed a hand over his heart. Arthur, the Sheikh is deeply impressed by that kind of loyalty. He says a man like David Chen is precisely the kind of talent he is investing in. He wants you to assure Mr. Chen that his position is not only secure, but that he will be a cornerstone of the new international expansion. The lie was so profound, so utterly disconnected from reality, that Sterling almost gasped. He looked at his phone, lying silently on the table, recording every syllable of the fraud. That is very good to hear, Sterling said, his voice tight. Then let's make it official, Croft said, pushing the contract forward. Sterling lowered the pen to the paper. He was stalling, drawing out the moment, his eyes darting toward the door, waiting for a signal. The library door swung open with a bang. It wasn't Clara, it was Marcus, the night manager, his face pale and sweating. Behind him stood two men in dark, severe suits that were clearly not American in their cut. They had the unmistakable air of consulate security. Gentlemen, Marcus stammered, I am so sorry to interrupt, but there are some gentlemen here who insist on speaking with Sheikh Al-Fahad. Croft shot to his feet. This is a private meeting. Have them removed. The two men ignored him, their eyes fixed on the Sheikh. The taller of the two stepped forward and spoke in formal, clipped Arabic. Sheikh Khalid Al-Fahad? I am from the consulate. We have received an inquiry from Riyadh. It seems there is some confusion about your affiliation with the Public Investment Fund. Al-Fahad's jaw went slack. The color drained from his face. He looked at Croft, his eyes wide with panic. Mother Yahduth. What is happening? Croft was frozen, his mind scrambling to process this catastrophic interruption. And then Clara walked in. She was no longer a ghost. She stood in the doorway, her cleaning uniform a badge of honor, her eyes blazing. She looked directly at Sheikh Al-Fahad, and then she spoke, not in English, but in flawless, cultured Arabic, her voice ringing with the clarity of a bell in the silent room. لقد قال إن مديرك السيد تشين سيتم طرده غدا, she announced, her voice echoing off the book-lined walls. "He said your manager, Mr. Chen, will be fired tomorrow." The sheikh flinched as if he'd been struck. Clara didn't stop. She switched to English, her gaze shifting to the stunned face of Arthur Sterling. He said, "I want to know old loyalties in my administration. He said your pension fund would be liquidated for 10 cents on the dollar. He said you were a weak man and this deal would be easy." "You lying bitch!" Croft shrieked, the mask of civility vaporizing in an instant. He lunged toward her, his face contorted with rage, but the two consulate men moved with surprising speed, blocking his path. Al-Fahad was on his feet, shouting at Clara in a torrent of furious Arabic. "Mananti! Kayfa tajru'in? Who are you? How dare you?" Clara met his rage with an icy calm. She replied in Arabic, her words sharp and precise. "أنا ابنة رجل أمين, وأنت لص يلطخ سمعة رجال الأعمال الشرفاء." "I am the daughter of an honest man, and you are a thief who stains the reputation of honorable businessmen." "Marcus!" Croft screamed at the terrified manager. "She's fired. Call the police. Have her arrested for trespassing." "Let her go," Arthur Sterling said. He didn't shout. His voice was quiet, but it carried the cold, immense weight of $900 million of fraud. He stood up, picked up his phone from the table, and stopped the recording. Marcus froze, caught between two centers of power. Sterling looked at Julian Croft. "Julian, you told me he wanted to keep my executive team. You translated that he was impressed with their loyalty." "She's insane," Croft sputtered, sweat beading on his forehead. "She's a cleaner. She probably knows a few phrases from a taxi driver. She's trying to blackmail us." "She quoted him, Julian," Sterling said. "Tomorrow, 10 cents on the dollar." He then turned to the taller consulate official. "Sir, I believe this man," he pointed at Al-Fahad, "has been fraudulently representing himself as an agent of your sovereign wealth fund. And this man," he pointed at Croft, "is his accomplice. I have an audio recording of the entire conversation." The official's eyes hardened. He gave a curt nod to his partner. They each took one of Al-Fahad's arms. The sheikh did not resist. He looked like a collapsed building. "You have no idea what you've done," Croft hissed at Clara, his voice dripping with venom. "You stupid, insignificant girl. You are finished." He then turned and hurried after the sheikh and his new escorts, his empire crumbling with every step. The library was plunged into a deafening silence. The only sounds were the frantic pounding of Clara's heart and the panicked breathing of Marcus, the manager. Marcus turned on Clara, his face a mask of pure rage and terror. "Get your things," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Get out of my club. If I see your face again, I will have you arrested." Clara nodded, the adrenaline beginning to crash, leaving a cold, terrifying void in its wake. She had won. She had also just lost her job, the only thing keeping her and her mother from homelessness. She untied the strings of her simple blue apron and let it fall to the floor. She turned to leave, her future a terrifying blank. "Wait," Arthur Sterling said. Clara stopped but didn't turn around. The reality of her situation was settling in like a shroud. "I have to go, sir," she whispered. "No," he said. "You don't." He walked over to her. Then he turned to Marcus. "Marcus, isn't it?" "Yes, Mr. Sterling. Again, my deepest apologies for this disturbance. She's gone." "She is," Sterling agreed, "and so am I. As of this moment, the Sterling family is terminating its membership with the Olympian Club, a membership that has stood for 87 years. Furthermore, I will be making a public statement to my 3 million social media followers that this club knowingly provides a safe haven for international con artists to conduct fraud on its premises, and that its management fires the whistleblowers who expose them." Marcus's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The Olympian Club ran on two things: money and reputation. A public scandal like that, from a name like Sterling, would be a death blow. What do you want, Mr. Sterling?" he finally managed to choke out. "I want 2 of your best steaks, medium rare, a bottle of your finest Cabernet, and I want to have dinner with my new senior strategic advisor," Sterling said, looking directly at Clara. "Please show Miss Evans to a table." 5 minutes later, Clara Evans was sitting in a plush leather booth, still in her cleaning uniform, across from a man whose company she had just saved. She was staring at a glass of wine that cost more than her entire day's wages. Her hands were still shaking. "You saved my company," Sterling said, his voice raw with emotion. "No, you saved more than that. My family's name. My father's legacy. I couldn't let them do it," Clara said, finding her voice. "What they said about the pensions, it was a desecration." "My father trusted men like Croft his whole life," Sterling mused, swirling the wine in his glass. "He always said he wasn't good at reading people, just spreadsheets. Looks like I inherited that flaw." He looked at her, his gaze intense. "But you have a Georgetown education in geopolitics, and you speak fluent Arabic." Clara blinked. "I have a 2-year associate's degree in mechanical engineering from a community college, and I learned Arabic because my dad's foreman had 6 kids, and I was the only American girl in the neighborhood." Sterling smiled, a genuine, weary smile. "Even better. You learned it from the ground up. You understand people, not just words." He leaned forward, his expression turning serious. "The threat from Croft is neutralized, but my company is still bleeding. The banks are circling. I'm still on the edge of that cliff." "What are you going to do?" Clara asked. "I'm going to make you an offer," he said. "It's not charity. It's a lifeline for both of us. The recording you helped me get is leverage, but I need someone who—" The cocktail napkin sat on the polished mahogany between them, a flimsy white flag of truce in a world she didn't understand. The ink, a deep, authoritative blue from Arthur Sterling's pen, had bled slightly into the soft paper, the numbers looking less like a contract and more like a desperate prayer. $200,000. The figure was an abstraction, a string of zeros that had no connection to her reality of overdue bills and the metallic taste of fear that woke her each morning. Clara stared at it, her mind a maelstrom. She felt a hysterical laugh bubbling in her chest. An hour ago, her greatest ambition was to finish her shift without a reprimand from Marcus. Now, she was being offered a salary that could erase every debt, every worry, every sleepless night that had plagued her and her mother for the past 5 years. It was a golden key to a life she had long ago accepted was not for her. Why? The word was a breath, fragile and laced with a suspicion so deep-rooted it was part of her DNA. In her world, gifts of this magnitude were never free. They were traps, gilded with generosity, that always snapped shut. "You asked that already," Sterling said, his voice low and gravelly with exhaustion. He swirled the deep red Cabernet in his glass, the light from the crystal chandelier fracturing in the liquid. "And I gave you the simple answer. Because of your character. But that's not the whole of it." He leaned forward, the exhaustion in his eyes replaced by a raw, unnerving intensity. "I spent the last 5 years in boardrooms, listening to men who speak the language of synergy and shareholder value. They use words like scalpels to carve out profits, never mind the lives that bleed out. They are all, to a man, fluent in the grammar of greed. Tonight, I almost signed away my great-grandfather's life's work because I couldn't hear the subtext. I couldn't hear the guillotine being sharpened while they complimented the executioner's suit." He set the glass down with a soft click. You heard it. You, a woman they were paid to ignore, heard the truth in a language they used as a weapon, assuming it was a shield. You don't just speak Arabic, Ms. Evans. You speak the language of intent. That's not a skill you learn in business school. It's a faculty of the soul, and right now, it's the only asset I trust. The fear in her chest began to slowly, tentatively, recede, replaced by something else. A flicker of understanding. He wasn't offering her a reward. He was drafting a soldier for a war he now knew he was losing. She looked from the napkin to his face, a face that had been ashen with defeat just an hour ago, but was now set with a grim, terrible resolve. She saw the cliff edge he was still clinging to. She thought of her father. She thought of his worn, calloused hands, hands that could calibrate a pressure gauge to 1,000th of an inch, but could never grasp the slippery logic of corporate betrayal. He had trusted the suits. She had not. That was the only difference between them. Clara slid the napkin back across the table toward him. Sterling's face fell for a fraction of a second before she spoke. I don't want a title, she said, her voice finding a new timbre, a firmness she hadn't known it possessed. Titles are for them. They're shields to hide behind. And the money is a separate conversation. First, we get through the night. Then we get through tomorrow. Pay off my mother's mortgage. That's the only number that matters to me right now. The rest we can discuss when there's still a company left to discuss it in. She pushed her untouched wine glass away and met his gaze. Deal? A slow, weary smile touched Arthur Sterling's lips. It was the first genuine expression she had seen from him. Deal, he said. The next morning dawned grey and cold, the Chicago sky the color of unpolished steel. Clara walked through the imposing glass doors of the Sterling Steel headquarters, a fortress of industry on the city's industrial south side. The air was thick with the smells of ozone, hot metal, and something else, the faint, cloying scent of desperation. It was a different world from the lemon polish and old leather of the Olympian Club, but the underlying fear was the same. She wore the only professional outfit she owned, a simple black dress and blazer she'd bought at a discount store 3 years ago for a job interview she didn't get. It felt like a costume. Every head that turned as she walked across the marble lobby, every curious glance from secretaries and junior executives made her feel like the ghost she had been trained to be. They saw the ill-fitting clothes, the worn-out shoes, and they dismissed her. She was used to being invisible, but this was a new kind of scrutiny, the scrutiny of not belonging. Arthur was waiting for her in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the vast, cathedral-like expanse of the factory floor. He looked like he hadn't slept. His tie was loosened, his sleeves were rolled up, and a day's worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. The table was a chaotic landscape of financial reports, legal pads, and a dozen half-empty coffee cups. He looked less like a CEO and more like a general in a field command tent after a devastating loss. "Good morning," he said, his voice hoarse. He gestured to a chair. "Welcome to the war." He didn't need to elaborate. A large screen on the wall was tuned to a financial news network. The chyron screamed in blood-red letters, "Sterling Steel plummets 8% in pre-market on collapsed bailout deal." A perfectly coiffed analyst was speaking in grave tones. Sources close to the deal suggest CEO Arthur Sterling's increasingly erratic behavior was the cause. Julian Croft, the architect of the proposed rescue package, has released a statement expressing his deep disappointment, citing Sterling's unfounded and bizarre last-minute accusations as a sign of a leadership in crisis. He didn't just walk away from the table, Clara murmured, her eyes fixed on the screen. He set the table on fire on his way out. He's poisoning the well, Arthur said, rubbing his temples. Painting me as unstable, scaring off any other potential investors. The banks have been calling since 6 a.m. They're invoking the material adverse change clause in our loan agreements. They're threatening to call in our debt by Friday. Croft isn't just trying to drive the price down. He's trying to trigger a full-blown liquidity crisis and force us into bankruptcy by the end of the week. Clara felt a cold knot form in her stomach. This was a level of warfare she couldn't have imagined. It wasn't just a hostile takeover, it was a scorched earth campaign. The audio recording, she said, her mind racing. We have to release it. It proves everything. My legal team is screaming bloody murder, Arthur sighed, gesturing to a stack of papers. Illinois is a two-party consent state. The recording is inadmissible in court. Releasing it would be a tactical nuclear strike. It would expose Croft, yes, but it would also open me up to a dozen civil suits and possibly even criminal charges. They'd tie us up in litigation for years, draining what little capital we have left. Croft knows that. He's daring me to do it, knowing it's a suicide mission. He slumped into his chair, the weight of it all seeming to crush him. He's checkmated me. No, Clara said, the word sharp and clear. She walked to the glass wall overlooking the factory floor. Below, men and women in hard hats moved with a practiced rhythm, dwarfed by colossal machinery. She could see the age in the equipment, the patches on the patches. She could also see the pride in the way they worked. This wasn't just a factory. It was an ecosystem, a community. He's playing chess on a board you can't see. We can't use the recording legally, but that doesn't mean we can't use the information from it. Her mind went back to the library, to the lies, to the arrogance. Alfahad was a fraud, a front man. But Croft is a pragmatist. He wouldn't have gone to all that trouble without a real buyer lined up, someone waiting in the wings to pick up the pieces after he drove you into the ground. The 900 million was a lie, but the intent to destroy you was real. Who was the real money? His network is a labyrinth of shell corporations and offshore accounts, Arthur said, defeated. We could spend years trying to unravel it. We don't have years, Clara countered, turning from the window. Her eyes were bright with a fierce, desperate energy. We have an asset he doesn't know about, the consulate. Sheikh Al-Fahad isn't just an inconvenience to them, he's a profound dishonor. He used the name of their sovereign fund to commit fraud. They won't be lenient. My father's friend, Tariq, he's not a powerful man, but he is a man of honor. He will see this not as a corporate squabble, but as an insult to his country. Al-Fahad is in their custody. He's scared. Men like that always talk when the gilded cage is replaced by a real one. A flicker of light returned to Arthur's eyes. He straightened up, watching her. You want to weaponize diplomatic protocol. Croft uses the law as a club, Clara said, a grim smile touching her lips. We'll use honor as a stiletto. It makes a smaller wound, but it goes much deeper. She pulled out her cheap smartphone, its screen cracked in one corner. She found the number and dialed, her hand surprisingly steady. When Tarek answered, his voice cautious, she spoke in the formal, respectful Arabic her father had insisted she learn. Uncle Tariq, it is Clara Evans. Forgive my intrusion so early in the day. The man from the club last night. He has brought shame upon a good name. Mr. Sterling and I believe he was merely a puppet. For the sake of the honor of the kingdom, and to prevent this predator from harming others, it is of the utmost importance that we know whose hand was guiding him. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Clara held her breath. She could hear the faint hum of the building's ventilation system, the distant roar of a furnace. Finally, Tariq's voice returned, low and hard as desert rock. "This man is a cancer, Clara. A disgrace who preys on the trust between our nations. His cowardice is as profound as his greed. He has already begun to speak of his master. The money, the real capital for the eventual liquidation, was being funneled through a holding company in Luxembourg. The principal investor, the true wolf, is a man named Thomas Bancroft." The name hung in the air. Clara looked at Arthur. His face had gone utterly, terrifyingly blank. The colour drained from it, leaving a pale, waxy sheen. He looked as if he had been physically struck. "Bancroft?" he whispered, the name a shard of glass in his throat. "Tom Bancroft?" "No, that's not possible." He stood up and walked unsteadily to a credenza, where a series of silver-framed photographs stood. He picked one up. It showed two men in golf attire, arms thrown around each other's shoulders, grinning into the camera. One was a younger Arthur Sterling. The other was a hale, hearty man with a folksy smile. Thomas Bancroft. "He's on my board. He was my father's best friend. He taught me how to ride a bike. He was the executor of my father's will." The betrayal was so immense, so seismic, it seemed to suck the very air from the room. It wasn't a knife in the back from an enemy. It was a slow, deliberate poisoning by a member of the family. "He was the inside man," Clara breathed, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. He fed Croft every weakness, every vulnerability. "He knew everything," Arthur said, his voice hollow. He stared at the photograph, at the smiling face of the man who had been a second father to him. The debt covenants, the pension fund's emotional weight, the capital expenditure delays. He didn't just know where to stick the knife. He forged the damn thing. For a long moment, he looked completely and utterly broken, a man whose entire past had just been revealed as a lie. The portraits of his ancestors on the walls of the club seemed like a joke. The legacy was a hollowed-out shell. Then, something shifted in his eyes. The shock and grief receded, replaced by a cold, quiet fury that was far more terrifying than any outburst of rage. He placed the photograph back on the credenza with surgical precision. When he turned back to Clara, he was no longer the beleaguered heir. He was a man who had lost everything and therefore had nothing left to fear. "All right," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Bancroft thinks he's a ghost in my machine. It's time to show him what happens when the machine develops a ghost of its own." He looked at Clara, his gaze locking with hers. "I'm calling an emergency board meeting for 3 o'clock this afternoon. Bancroft will be there. He'll expect me to be panicked, desperate. He'll be ready to deliver the killing blow, to call for my removal. And you," he said, "are going to be right there with me." The boardroom at Sterling Steel was a tomb of corporate history. The mahogany table was a dark, polished lake reflecting the stern, oil-painted faces of Sterling patriarchs. Thomas Bancroft sat near the head of the table, his expression a perfect mask of avuncular concern. He had aged, but the folksy smile was the same as in the photograph. It was the smile of a man who knew how to hide his soul. "Arthur, this is a panicked move," Bancroft began, his voice dripping with sympathy as the other board members filed in. "The markets smell blood. We need to project calm, stability. Not this chaos." "We need clarity, Tom," Arthur said. He stood at the head of the table, his posture ramrod straight. Clara stood a half step behind him, a silent, unassuming figure in a room of $1,000 suits. Her presence was an anomaly, and the board members eyed her with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. "And who, may I ask, is this?" Bancroft asked, gesturing dismissively at Clara as if shooing away a fly. "This is Miss Evans," Arthur said, his voice ringing with cold authority. "My new senior strategic advisor. She has a remarkable talent for translation." He let that word hang in the air for a moment before he placed his phone on the table and pressed play. The sound of the secret recording filled the room. Not the whole thing, but a carefully curated selection. Croft's smooth English lies, followed by the Sheikh's guttural Arabic truths. "Tell him to stop whining like a widow. Liquidate the fund and give them 10 cents on the dollar. The man is weaker than I thought. This deal will be easy." When it was over, a stunned silence descended. Bancroft was the first to recover, his face a canvas of manufactured outrage. "My God, Arthur, the man was a monster. You were nearly fleeced. It's a testament to your instincts that you walked away from this charlatan." "But what does this have to do with us, with the current crisis?" "The question, Tom," Arthur said, his eyes boring into Bancroft's, "is how this charlatan knew our precise breaking point. How Julian Croft knew about the specific cash flow trigger in our agreement with First National. How he knew the pension fund was my father's sacred cow, my most profound emotional vulnerability. Information that has never left this room." "He's a corporate raider, a shark," Bancroft blustered, spreading his hands. "It's his business to find weaknesses." "Or," Clara spoke for the first time. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension like a laser. "He was given a map by someone who had the blueprints, someone who knew that a $900 million offer was just bait, designed to fail, because the real prize was getting the company for pennies on the dollar in a bankruptcy auction. An auction that would be financed by a certain holding company in Luxembourg." Bancroft's smile finally vanished, replaced by a reptilian stillness. "These are wild, baseless accusations from a night shift cleaner from the Olympian Club. Arthur, have you lost your mind? Are you letting your staff dictate corporate strategy? This woman is clearly a manipulative charlatan herself, feeding you conspiracy theories to enrich herself." Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Bancroft was one of them. He was a known quantity. This woman was a nobody. He was playing on their fear, their elitism. "It's more than an accusation, Tom," Arthur said calmly. He nodded to his lawyer, who entered and placed a single sheet of paper in front of every board member. "This is not the inadmissible recording. This is a sworn, notarized affidavit from a Mr. Tariq al-Jamil, an attaché with the Saudi Arabian consulate. It is his official testimony regarding the confession of the man calling himself Sheikh al-Fahad. It names you, Tom. It names your Luxembourg account. And it details your plan to collude with Julian Croft to defraud this company and its shareholders." The room was utterly silent. The affidavit was legally sound, diplomatically verified. It wasn't a secret recording. It was an official complaint from a foreign government. Bancroft stared at the paper, his face turning the color of old parchment. He didn't shout. He didn't deny it. He simply looked up at Arthur, and in his eyes Arthur saw not remorse, but the cold, flat hatred of a predator that has been trapped. The aftermath was not a victory parade. It was triage in a war zone. Bancroft's ouster sent shock waves through the financial community, but the company was still hemorrhaging money. The banks, spooked by the instability, refused to extend their credit lines. The narrative had shifted from failing heir to embattled fighter, but fighters could still lose. In the grueling weeks that followed, Clara became Arthur's shadow. She was no longer just a truth-teller. She was a strategist. While Arthur battled with bankers and lawyers in sterile boardrooms, Clara walked the factory floor. She drank bitter coffee with union foremen, listening to their grievances and their ideas. She learned the company from the ground up, not from spreadsheets, but from the men and women whose lives depended on it. She discovered inefficiencies the executives had never seen and untapped potential they had never imagined. She used her unique background to help vet new potential investors, this time from legitimate sovereign wealth funds in the Gulf, men of honor, as her father would have called them. In meetings in Dubai and Riyadh, sitting next to Arthur, she was no longer the invisible woman. She listened to the flowery English promises, and then she would ask a single, quiet question in flawless Arabic, cutting through the pleasantries to the heart of the matter. She could distinguish a partner from a predator in a single sentence. She became Arthur's compass, his shield. 3 months later, Clara stood with Arthur on a catwalk, high above the main smelting floor. The air was hot and smelled of progress. The roar of the machinery, once a death rattle, was now a steady, powerful heartbeat. A new partnership had been signed. The loans were restructured. The company was saved. Not just saved, but reborn, leaner, smarter, and forged in the fire of betrayal. "The foreclosure notice is framed," Clara said quietly, watching the white-hot river of molten steel pour into a mold below. "My mother hung it on the wall. She calls it her masterpiece." "You earned it, Clara," Arthur said, his voice full of a quiet respect that went far beyond gratitude. "You reminded me that the foundation of this company isn't steel, it's promises, the ones we keep to the people on that floor." He looked at her, at the woman who had worn a faded blue uniform, who had been paid to erase herself. "The board officially created your new position this morning," he said. "Executive Vice President of Strategy and International Development. The compensation package is substantial. It comes with a corner office with a view of the lake." Clara smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that reached her eyes. "I appreciate the view, Arthur, but I think I prefer this one." She gestured to the sprawling factory below, a world of fire and force, of tangible creation. "I'm not a corner office person. I think better when I can smell the fight." "Then we'll move the damn office down here," he replied, a matching smile on his own face. She looked out at the sparks flying like constellations in the vast, industrial dark. She had walked into the Olympian Club a ghost, armed with nothing but a truth she was terrified to speak. She had learned that power wasn't about the name on the door or the suit on your back. It was about seeing the world as it was, not as you were told it was. It was about listening to the silences. And it was about the profound, terrifying, and world-altering courage of a single whispered word.